Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, another COVID mandate struck down in the courts as a federal judge rules against the president's mask mandate for travel. The White House asking for money for COVID relief, but critics point out some of the money already intended for COVID has been spent on projects that had nothing to do with the pandemic. As the war in Ukraine rages on, people in the country are just beginning to observe Holy Week. We'll hear what believers in Ukraine have to say about their faith in the midst of deadly attacks. Plus, we take you to a farm in the heart of Judea. See why it's a fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
As a young boy, David would take his sheep out and pasture his sheep in these lands. And according to the Jewish tradition, most of the book of Psalms was written here in these mountains before David became king.
And Christian author and host Beth Townsend shares the keys to finding God's purpose for our lives.
Everybody wants to know who they are, but I like to start with the backwards approach.
Learn more about this approach later. All these stories and more are coming up next from the CBN Newsroom.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin with a big change in a Biden administration mandate on COVID. Americans can say goodbye to masks on airplanes. Now the federal judge in Florida has ruled the federal travel mask mandate is unlawful, striking down the Centers for Disease Control's requirement. CBN Jenna Browder has the story now from Washington.
The TSA and about half a dozen airlines say they're dropping the mandate. And as you might imagine, the news is being met with mixed reaction.
Masks now optional for employees, customers, following the White House.
Passengers on this Delta flight erupting into cheer. But in airports across the country, many are still choosing to mask up.
I think it's for our own protection because obviously COVID is still going around.
I think people are just so tired of wearing masks.
On Monday, a federal judge in Florida, appointed by former President Trump, struck down the travel mask mandate, claiming it exceeds the CDC's statutory authority. The White House confirming this means the mask order is no longer in effect on a federal level. It's now up to local authorities to enforce mandates.
This is obviously a disappointing decision. The CDC continues recommending wearing a mask in public transit.
The ruling could have a political impact on the Biden administration.
Now, coronavirus and handling coronavirus is something that a majority of voters believe that Biden is doing a good job on, but a small number of voters prioritize it, or a small number of voters view that as a top issue. A lot of the country has moved on.
Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections on CBN's Faith Nation.
So when you get news like this that is mixed, I think it could potentially hurt President Biden and Democrats on an issue where he does have the more trust with the American people than he does on other issues.
And for now, the White House says it's reviewing the decision and has yet to announce whether or not it will make an appeal. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Despite trillions of dollars already being spent on COVID relief, the Biden administration says it needs new funding to continue the fight. But some lawmakers point out much of the money already designated for it has been misspent. As Matt Galka reports, they're calling for accountability.
Members of Congress will be returning from their break soon, and when they do, one of the issues they'll be working on is new money to spend on COVID and pandemic response. But before they get to that point, some lawmakers want to know what happened to the rest of the money. A ballpark upgrade, a new hotel, a ski area, and a prison facelift. What do they have in common? Local governments using federal COVID dollars to pay for the projects, most coming from the billions in taxpayer money given out as part of the American Rescue Plan. While the legislation was intended to help Americans recover from the COVID economic impact, it also allowed broad definitions for how the money could be used.
The American Rescue Plan provided $350 billion to state and local governments with very few strings attached.
Citizens Against Government Waste President Tom Schatz says he's not surprised at this result.
Federal government is very good at giving out money and not caring how it gets spent, and then not worrying about whether it comes back if it's being wasted. There are no guarantees when the money comes from Washington.
When Congress returns from recess, lawmakers will likely have to decide on a new COVID funding bill requested by the Biden administration. Some, however, are already asking how the initial recovery money got spent and looking to offset new spending by repurposing old funds.
There was uncertainty back then. Live and learn, and we need to make sure that we're not hiding unspent COVID funds when we're talking about maybe spending more on COVID should it flare up again.
Senator Mitt Romney led the negotiations on repurposing COVID money before the break. His office says they reached a $10 billion agreement for a new bill before it hit other hangups. The Heritage Foundation's Doug Badger says there will still be challenges to get the bill passed in Congress when lawmakers return.
At this point, when the administration says we need money for COVID, it should be met with bipartisan skepticism. Congress should be asking the tough questions.
Before going on break, it did look like a deal was struck for new COVID spending, but it got derailed when it was tied to Title 42, an immigration measure affecting the southern border. That could still play a factor when the recess ends. Matt Gelka, CBN News.
Turning now to the war in Ukraine, Russia's military has reportedly destroyed weapons the U.S. and Europe sent to help Ukraine. We'll tell you more about that in a moment. First, today, Russian forces launching attacks in eastern Ukraine as part of a full-scale ground offensive. The goal to take control of the country's eastern industrial heartland. Ukrainian official called it a new phase of the war. Those moves coming after Russian troops destroyed several Ukrainian army facilities from Sunday to Monday. That is according to the Russian Defense Ministry, saying Russian armed forces destroyed a number of military targets of the Ukrainian forces Sunday evening with high-precision missiles, and that Russian aerospace forces used high-precision airborne missiles to hit a Ukrainian logistics center near the city of Lviv, destroying large amounts of weapons sent to Ukraine from the U.S. and European countries. Life goes on in much of Ukraine despite the war raging in other parts of the country. Ukraine follows the Eastern Orthodox calendar, which means Holy Week just got underway. CBN's Wendy Griffith tells us that worshipers in Lviv joined with worshipers in Lviv as they gathered to celebrate Palm Sunday.
Lviv is home to some of the most beautiful churches in the world, and nearly 100 adorn the city. Most were shut down during the Soviet era, but the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 triggered a resurgence of the Christian faith and its churches, including this magnificent Greek Catholic Church of St. Andrew.
Here in Ukraine, it's Palm Sunday. Easter is still a week away, but the churches are packed with people praying that just as Jesus defeated death on a cross, Ukraine will also see a victory.
We have this Christian tradition that Christ is risen and Ukraine will be risen too. And we strongly believe that the enemy will fall down and we will have this victory.
Here in Lviv, considered a safe haven for residents and refugees alike, airstrikes were reported over the weekend.
Dear guests, an alien raid has been issued in Lviv. Please stay calm and go down to the reception in the shelter.
And many churches are boarded up with priceless statues heavily wrapped in case the worst happens.
So they're saying now that nobody is off limits. There is no safe havens now, not even Lviv.
Yes.
Are you scared?
Yes.
Are you worried?
Actually not scary, because I understand my life belongs to Christ. I need to do what God tells me to do.
So you're not leaving?
What?
You're not
yes, I am not supposed to leave. My wife stays with me too. I have 2 children, and we are trusting God.
Believers at Spring of Life Church are praying around the clock for their country. And Arson says during a recent time of prayer, God gave him some good news for Ukraine.
I just start praying in my spirit, and I receive this word that Russia will be defeated. Russia will be defeated. When you hearing all dangerous, all like, don't be in panic. Just lift up your hand and pray. It will be like a shield. When you lifted up your hands, it will be like a shield. And you can see our pastors, when we are praying, a lot of say, lifted up your hand, lifted up your hand. So that's what we are doing when we are hearing all the bad news, all the rockets. Yes, we got a lot of rockets in our city, Lviv too, but praise God, everybody, it's like we're doing the case.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News, Lviv, Ukraine.
As the war rages on, millions of Ukrainians have fled the country. CBN's Operation Blessing is providing them with some much-needed assistance. You can help Operation Blessing in its disaster relief efforts by calling 1-800-700-7000. Just let us know that you want to give to the Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund. You can also write us at CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia. The zip code is 23463. Simply note in the memo line of your check, Disaster Relief Fund. You can text us as well, by the way. Just text OB Crisis to 71777. You can also visit our website, cbn.com, and Operation Blessing's website, ob.org. Anything you're able to do is greatly needed and appreciated. Coming up, see how this farm in Judea is said to be a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. We've got the story for you. Stay with us. A house of prayer on top of a mountain, hundreds of trees and a vineyard. All of this and much more is all part of a farm in the heart of Judea. It's located in what much of the world calls the West Bank, and its founders see it as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Chris Mitchell brings us this firsthand look.
On these hills, not far from Jerusalem, lies the Arugot Farm. For 6 years, its founders have built a complex on land where previously there was nothing but barren hills. Located in Judea, its founders see the place as the Bible coming to life. CBN News met with two of its founders, Abrimovitz and Jeremy Gimpel.
Tell us where we are.
We're in the heart of the land of Judea. Bethlehem is about 15 minutes that way. Right over there, as those buildings kiss the sky, that's Jerusalem. 45 minutes directly this way is Hebron. And if you triangulate that, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, and Hebron, and you bring it right here, we are in the heart of the land of Judea.
Gimpel talks about the connection to King David.
And as a young boy, David would take his sheep out and pasture his sheep in these lands. And according to the Jewish tradition, most of the book of Psalms was written here in these mountains before David became king. So in his time of trouble, where did he run to? To the place that he knew best. He knew where the caves were, he knew where the water holes were, he knew how to live here, he knew how to survive here. These are historic, holy mountains.
The UN and many countries consider the mountains where David wrote the Psalms occupied territory, and see the Jews who live there in a place they call the West Bank as an obstacle to peace.
And why do they call it the West Bank? Because it's much easier to say, let's get the settlers out of the West Bank, then let's remove the Jews from Judea, right? The reason Jews are called Jews is because we're from Judea. This is our indigenous land. The first Jew that was called a Jew was Mordechai, the Jew, but he was from the tribe of Benjamin. So why was he called a Jew? Because he was exiled from Judea. So this is the most natural, holistic place for a Jew to actually grow and thrive, right here in Judea.
Local leaders asked these farmers to settle the land to create a tourist attraction and a strategic buffer. It's become much more.
When I came out here, after just a few weeks, all of the strategy and the military, none of that mattered at all. So for me, I think for Jeremy too, when we came out here, it's like, this is what it is to be a Jew. Maybe not for every Jew, but for us out here, this is just the place where it's like, oh, this is just the most natural thing that could ever possibly happen.
Both Ari and I felt called to come here and then pave this road and open the place up where the Psalms were written. I mean, imagine that. King David taught every Catholic in the world, every Christian in the world, every Jew in the world. When someone is sick, they open up the book of Psalms, and he taught us all how to pray to God. And those prayers entered the world here. So this place is meant to be a center for prayer and worship and song and music and art and Torah that's open to everyone from every background.
One common perception about this land is that Jews and Arabs can't coexist. That's not the case here.
And now if you go to our Bedouin village near us, an Arab village over there, and you say to them, what do you think of these Jews here? They always say they are beloved friends of ours. They are a blessing to us and they're a blessing. I know that they would say that because they've come here and they said that they would stand with us. Okay, Jeremy, Ari, where are we now?
So this is the top of the mountain. And according to Jewish law, on the top of a mountain, you need to build a structure that's dedicated to the God Most High. And so this is our house of prayer. and it's taken us 7 years to build.
I consider this place the diamond in the crown of everything we've done, possibly the diamond in the crown of Judea, right? This is the soul of our place, is really right here.
What's so beautiful is that, we are surrounded by many different types of people, but the mattresses that you see here and the pillows in our house of prayer was donated to us by the Muslim Arab village right down here. They so much appreciated us coming here because when we came here, we repaved the roads that lead to their village as well. Police officers are now patrolling down the roads, making sure people are driving safer. We've been a blessing of this place.
One of the most important elements of this place is, as we were talking about before, the words of the prophets, that when we return to the land, God will remove from us a heart of stone and put within us a heart of flesh, and circumcise our hearts.
In addition to the House of Prayer, the farm includes several homes, a retreat center in the making, hundreds of trees, and a vineyard. They also host an online Bible study called the Land of Israel Fellowship. Throughout the building, the Book of Amos serves as their blueprint. Jeremy, Ari, we're here on a hillside, but you see this as prophecy coming to life, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, this is prophecy coming to life. There's a village over there called Ma'ale Amos. This is undoubtedly, irrefutably, the very land in which the prophet Amos had his prophecy. Right? He was actually a cowboy, right? And so his prophecy was in these mountains. And the last 3 verses of his prophecy, he says, I'll return the exiles of my people, and they will rebuild desolate cities, and they will plant vineyards and drink their wine, and they will plant gardens and eat their fruit. And I will plant them upon their land, and they'll never be uprooted again. And so here we have vineyards right in the very land in which he prophesied.
Amos was in these mountains here, and he had this vision that there would be rebuilt cities and vineyards and fruit trees. And then I wonder, this building that's being built here and this vineyard that's planted here, was this exactly what he saw? But we built it with the inspired words. He guided us to plant that.
Chapter 8 of the book of Amos, I think, summarizes our whole mission here. If you want to know what is our business plan, the book of Amos. There will be a hunger in the land. And the hunger will not be for bread, and the thirst will not be for water, but to hear the words of Hashem. The retreat center and the house of prayer, everything we're doing is to satisfy this hunger that isn't for bread, and the thirst is not for water, but to hear the words of God. And the words of God are echoing from the mountains of Judea to the entire world.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Arugot Farm, Judea.
Still ahead, Christian author and host Beth Townsend joins us next to talk about finding God's purpose for our lives. Stay with us. We've all heard it, we know it, but do we truly believe that God's purpose for our life prevails? Everyone wants to know who they are and what they're called to do with their lives. Award-winning TV host and Christian author Beth Townsend tells CBN News' The Prayer Link that finding out who you are begins with knowing you're not. Take a look.
Everyone wants to know who they are and what to do with their life, but your approach in helping people find that is a little bit different. Tell us about how you guide people in that.
Well, as a coach, I work with people because, like you said, everybody wants to know who they are. But I like to start with the backwards approach, because if you know who you're not and who God's not called you to be, who you are then begins to emerge and have complete freedom to walk in the giftedness and the fullness of the Spirit. We try to be too many things, and we get too influenced by the culture that we see what other people are doing, and we think maybe I should do that. But we shrink back and we say to God, where is it that I'm gifted? What's my it? And then once we hear from him and we eliminate all those, what I like to call, you got to know your knots. Once you eliminate the knots, who you are becomes very evident, and it becomes much easier. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
I like to know your knots.
Yeah, that's right. And Beth, you host a series on PureFlix called Life on Purpose. Tell us about that.
Well, I was on my own at 17, so I went to work. And as a result of that, I was dependent upon being successful at work because, when work is all you got, work has to work for you. So fast forward, I became a speaker in my industry because I was really good at what I did. And so people began to ask me the question, and I was just in my 20s, how did you know your purpose? Simply because it looked like I knew my purpose. So people over time, as they asked that question more and more, I had been saved, but I didn't really know what being a Christian was like. I thought, I think that's a God thing, purpose. So I told my husband, I said, I'm going to go interview people. They wake up every day. They know what God's calling them to do, and they're doing it. And I'm going to ask them front and center how they knew and how they did it. And that started in 2001. I've been doing that ever since.
That's amazing, Beth. I love it. Beth, a little real talk here now. We have all made mistakes, and some people live with the regret of those mistakes, and they think it's, takes them off of God's plan for their lives. How do you encourage people who are struggling with mistakes of the past?
Well, we, like you said, we've all had mistakes. Everyone that I interviewed, we all come from a broken family. We've all pretty much created a broken family because we're in a broken world. So what you have to do is you have to accept that there's just some things, purpose is a process. It's not perfection. So we have to know we're going to make mistakes. And when you're on your own at 17, I spent the first half of my life, I like to say, if it's not on purpose, is it an accident? Because so much of what we feel the consequences of is our own poor decisions. And so I lived the consequences of many of those. And then, when I began to seek Christ and I began to understand there's a better path for my life. And, purpose is a mindset. It's a faith, it's a mindset, but it's committing to a path where you're going to make less mistakes and you're going to live on purpose.
And you can catch Prayer Link on the CBN News channel tonight at 6:30 Eastern. You can also download the CBN News app so you can watch it on demand. Stay with us. Your Tuesday Tweetable is coming up next. Time now for your Tuesday Tweetable. I'll leave you with this thought. Your life's purpose is tied to the needs of others. You are an answer to someone else's prayer. So be that answer. Let God use you. He stands ready when you stand available to be used. With that word, make this a great Tuesday. And be sure to have yourself a wonderful rest of the week. That will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Thank you for watching. You can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel or online at cbnnews.com. Let us know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Goodbye and God bless.